Hey, it's Jared. In this video, I'm going to talk about my initial experience with the Sony 85mm G Master 2. This is the latest upgrade of this lens, and I did have the previous lens model. Now, I decided to upgrade to this lens because there are some things that kept me from using my other 85mm. First of all, that lens has been around for a while. I was super excited when it came out because it was one of the first prime G Master lenses that Sony came out with. It was in that early batch, and I was buying pretty much any lens that I can get my hands on because I had recently switched over to Sony from Canon. And so I wanted those G Master lenses, and I was excited, and I used that 85mm quite a bit. But as I've been shooting a lot more video with my mirrorless cameras, I haven't been using that 85mm lens because it's a bit slow for focus, and it's actually quite loud when it does focus. And so I found myself using other lenses like my 50mm, or maybe even just using a 70-200 instead, because those lenses are faster with the autofocus and they don't make a bunch of noise. So I did just get this lens in because I pre-ordered it, and then when it shipped, I finally got it. And I wanted to give my initial thoughts on this lens by showing some examples of some images that I shot and just talking about the experience of using the 85mm. This is definitely not a lens that I think most people would want to upgrade from the previous model. The previous model is probably fine for most people. At the end of the video, I will share my couple of thoughts on why you might upgrade, but for most people, there's really no reason to upgrade to this lens. And of course, if you're interested in the lens, in pricing, you could check out the link that I have in the description, because using those links to make your purchase does support the channel. So let's take a look at some of the images that I shot in Glacier National Park the other day. I took this lens on my Sony A7CR into Glacier National Park, along with some other stuff that I was testing out as well, and these are the images that I was able to capture. Now, an image like this is a bit challenging because of the foreground and the background. It's fall or autumn and the colors are changing, and so there's a lot going on over here, not so much going on back there. But an image like this can produce problems with certain lenses just because there's not only so much going on with all of the trees, but also because there's a lot going on with the colors and everything else that has to come through the glass and get to that camera sensor. So with this image, obviously the background is more lit than the foreground. The sun was definitely over there. There's not a whole lot going on in that background. It's nowhere near as interesting as the foreground is in this image. It's hard to find an exact 100% zoom here, but as I zoom in, you can see there's good detail and everything. I love the color rendering. Yes, I did apply an edit to this. This is not straight out of camera. This is the image straight out of camera. On a day like it was when I was shooting the other day, everything was just pretty flat. It's definitely beautiful there, and to me, with where the sun was and everything, it was prettier than what the camera was able to capture. And so applying some edits definitely makes those colors pop. This feels more like the experience that I had when I was there. Now, granted, I was also shooting with a filter on the camera as well. I've been using the Short Stash filter, which is a circular polarizer and a black mist combined, and that's going to change some things about the image as well. A circular polarizer, first of all, is probably something that I'm shooting with on any lens as I'm out shooting on bright days. A circular polarizer helps balance out the light, and it also helps with brighter areas and also maintaining some of the color in the sky. What this filter also adds is a bit of black mist diffusion as well, which is a stylistic choice, and so these images have gone through that. And so keep that in mind as you're looking at these images and thinking, wow, that's maybe not as sharp as I would expect it to be. It's probably because I have that filter on and it's a look that I'm going for. So initially, I am not looking for perfection in my images. I'm going for more of a certain style or look. So one of the things that definitely stood out to me as I switched over and shot a portrait view of this is that the portrait view just looks much better. Even though it's the same lens, the same camera, I'm standing in the same position, this image just ends up looking better because there's more sky up there balancing out the background and the foreground. And so overall, I liked this image better. There are definitely some images that I took that just didn't work out at all. It didn't have anything to do with the lens. It had to do with the fact that the sun was coming in this direction. I'm shooting that direction. There's probably some atmospheric issues there where it's just misty and everything, and it's lighting that up, and it's just making for an overall bad image. It's not the fault of the 85mm or even the A7CR. It's just a bad position of the sun and where I'm standing. But obviously I was trying to get down the valley here, and that image just wasn't working out. And I tried to make it work. I tried moving a little bit. I tried landscape, portrait, just wasn't going to work out. And I'm actually working backwards in these images. This image here being the very last one that I shot with this particular lens, and this is my journey backwards as I came through the park. So what I like about this image is the compression. If I had a wide angle lens, which typically is something that I'd be using when shooting a landscape, I wouldn't get this compression. I wouldn't look so close to that mountain. That mountain would look really far away. And this image is nice because it just looks like I'm almost there. I'm around the corner. I'm getting there. I'm close. And the 85mm allowed me to capture that image where there's a little bit of street, but really I'm at least 15 minutes away from even getting close to that particular mountain. So I like this image. I might get rid of some distracting things there, but overall I like this image. As I pinch and zoom in a bit here, I don't see anything crazy happening around the edges of trees, and often that happens, especially with the direction of light being something that I can't control. The sun is where it's at, and all I can do is make the best of it. But a lot of times you end up getting fringing and issues around the edges of these tree branches that sometimes can be a little bit distracting. Now I'm zooming in quite a bit here, but you can still see a lot of detail, even all the way back here. I mean, this is far away. That is quite a distance way up there, and everything looks really good and nice and sharp. There's no issues there. Even if I get really close, which I'm probably 300 or 400% zoomed in now, and I just don't see anything that would be distracting. As I look at the mountain up here, I could crop this like that and it would be a good looking image, maybe just with a little bit more contrast added. But overall, a decent image. And then here was the original. It was a little dark, a little plain. I wanted it to be more punchy, which is what I did in the edit. A couple of different images, this from the same location, but in a landscape orientation. I experienced the same thing here that I experienced in one of the earlier images. Simply by rotating the camera, I got a slightly different experience. I got a little bit more color here in the background. And this is another thing that happens when you're shooting auto white balance. I was shooting auto white balance because the day was changing quite often. I drive from one spot to the next. Light's changing, color temperature's changing, it's a cloudy day, sun's coming in and out of the clouds, and so auto white balance is just a little bit easier to deal with than a fixed white balance, especially when I'm wanting to get out, get a shot, and move on to the next location because there's lots of other people wanting to do the same thing. If you're wanting to learn more about this type of stuff, take my free Ditch Auto class. It's going to help you get out of automatic mode on your camera and learn to shoot in manual by understanding aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and a lot of the other camera settings that contribute to taking control of your camera and getting the images that you want. From there, I have my Fundamentals of Photography course, which is much more in-depth and teaches you composition and how to use a lot of other aspects of photography to get the images that you desire. I captured a few more images in that location, also changed my exposure a little bit too, just to see what other emotions I could drag out of this location before moving on to the next spot. And so obviously I took several there, even a couple more in portrait orientation before moving on. And then I took a couple of product photos. I had the new Peak Design outdoor bag with me that I was carrying this camera in, and I got the Peak Design tripod and just a few other things there. And there are several things that I ended up really liking about this image. Not only do I feel like it's a good image of the bag in this particular location, but from the angle, there are other things that are on the focal plane that just look great and that you can see. Obviously, there's some good compression, there's some fall off of that focus there. So even though the center of the bag was my focus point, there's some branches over here that were on the same focal plane. And then as we kind of pan up here into the image, you can see the focus fall off, and it's just so smooth. I mean, with most lenses, when you shoot an image like this, and there's fall off into foliage of any sort, that's when you start to see whether a lens is good or not. You start to see it in the bokeh, if there is any of that in the background. You start to see weird things taking place with the image, especially on cheaper lenses. But on this particular lens, everything just looks so good and it falls off so naturally. And overall, there's just nothing distracting about this image. Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's some weirdness happening here in the foreground. Maybe I would have done something a little bit different there. But in looking at this image technically, I really like it. And it's a good image of the bag that I didn't really even intend on taking. I was just setting my bag somewhere while I was taking other photos. And then here's the original image without the edits applied to it. Then I tried taking some images, but as you can see, just the sky is not working. And that happens, and it doesn't matter what lens you have. If the light is not in the right direction and you're trying to shoot something that is shaded and there's just a ton of light in the background, it's not going to work out too well. But this also can expose flaws in camera lenses as well. If we zoom in here, typically in this image, we would see a mess along the ridge line here with those trees. And even this branch sticking up here, there'd be weird issues of fringing and abnormalities that are showing up there. And there's nothing happening here that you can't just blame on the fact that the sky's blown out and there's no detail in the sky. And yes, some of that light is going to wrap around subjects a little bit and cause issues, but a good lens does a good job of maintaining separation and detail between things and their background. And even though that's not the focal point of this image, there are no issues taking place here. And even as I zoom in, probably 400 or more % into this image, I don't see any weird colors or anything weird taking place in the background of this image. And so while this is not an image that I get excited about looking at, it's a great image for trying to figure out, is this camera lens doing new and exciting things? And I think that it is. I changed my location a little bit, had to shoot between some things to get this image, tried shooting a portrait of the same, lots of things going on in this image. Overall, a decent image. We've got, of course, my focal point being back here. We have things in the foreground that obviously are not going to be in focus because they're in the foreground, but overall, a nice image. I could probably make a few extra changes to it and make it pop a lot more, but overall, another good example of why an 85mm is useful. I was pretty far away from this particular location. I was up near the road, and the only way to get a good image is just to shoot through this window, and that's essentially what I did. And I was still able to capture what I think is a half decent image. I couldn't improve this image without going and doing some pruning to the forest, which I'm obviously not going to do. Down by the lodge in Glacier National Park, a few years ago, I took a beautiful image of this pathway, and the colors are definitely changing. They haven't fully changed, so this image wasn't exactly what I was hoping for it to be, but it's a good overall image. And I like the 85mm here because the draw of this image is what goes down the path. You're walking down the path, you're seeing things get smaller, you've got beautiful foliage all the way around you. You don't want too much sky, especially considering how bland the sky was. But overall, when I'm looking at this image, there is a lot going on, and there's a lot that could get messed up with a lens that's not doing its job. And this lens is definitely keeping a lot of things looking good. Now, my focal point was way too far down. You can see my focal point was way down here. And so a lot of things that are in the foreground of this image are out of focus. My focal point probably should have been closer to this tree or this post and not all the way in the background, so that there was more detail all the way out here. But when you have an image like that, there tends to be a lot of issues in the foreground as well. And zoom in perhaps way too far, I'm not seeing anything other than maybe a little bit of image noise, which was definitely camera generated and probably made worse by me increasing the contrast of this image substantially. But overall, everything else is good about this image. The only things I could have changed was the focal point, and perhaps maybe the clouds could have behaved a little bit more. Here's another perspective of this image. I didn't spend a lot of time editing this. I copied over the edit from the previous image, and this probably needs some adjustments because there's less sky and less light in the image. Now, here's another image that's a little bit challenging. It was early in the day, super bright up here, super dark down here. And if you look at the original image, you can see it's overall pretty flat and not super exciting, but after adding a little bit of contrast, definitely helped out the image and made it a little bit more of an attractive image. Now, my focal point was right in about here on this image, probably a little bit too far away, but with the 85 capturing everything as sharply as it did, I could probably do a sky replacement on this image, and most people wouldn't notice. Now, here's a picture of my Leica Q3. This was on a different day, the first day that I got this lens. And while this is a video about the Sony and the Sony camera, I do enjoy shooting with the Leica camera as well. And the 85mm is not typically a lens that I would choose for product photography, but everything looks really good. There's good compression here. You can really see some of the bokeh in the background as the focus fall off is pretty drastic. This being a relatively shallow depth of field, I think I was probably at like I was f3.5, so not wide open, but definitely shallow enough depth of field that there's substantial focus fall off in the background. And I've also been testing the Leica Q3 43mm as well, and I've got a picture of my dog to finish everything off. So what are my overall thoughts on this camera lens? Well, first of all, I think it's a great lens. I think Sony's G Master line just continues to get better. Some of the lenses, I feel like they took a little while to upgrade, like the 85mm. As I mentioned before, I haven't been using my 85mm for a while because of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So if you have the 85mm G Master, I don't necessarily think that you should upgrade to this lens. The reason to upgrade would be for the same reasons that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Your old 85mm is either too loud or too slow with the autofocus compared to what these more modern Sony cameras can do, and that would be a reason to upgrade. But the original 85mm G Master is a fantastic lens, and I'm most certain you'll be able to find a handful of them on the used market. So if you're looking at getting the 85mm, check out the link in the description below to either Amazon or B&H. Using those links helps support me. I'm also a big fan of this filter that I've been using. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's a polarizer and black diffusion filter for the 77mm filter thread. I'll link to that down below as well. When I'm outdoors, I'm already going to be shooting with a polarizer, and I've just really enjoyed the black mist look on top of that. And so it's a great filter that has both of those things combined. I'll link to that down in the description below. So let me know what you think down in the comment section. This video is a little bit different than the typical video style of mine. There are a lot of other YouTubers out there that did a technical review of this lens, and I love those videos and watch those videos, so I thought I would go about it a little different, showing the images that I was able to capture and talking about those images for a bit. So if you found that useful, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, check out those links in the description, and I'll see you back in another one soon. Take care.